At 11:27 hours on January 11, 1944, Major James Howard banked his P-51B Mustang hard left over the German town of Oschersleben and saw something that should have ended his war in the next 30 seconds. 9 German fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, spread across 2,000 feet of altitude, closing fast on a crippled formation of B-17 flying fortresses whose escort had just vanished in the clouds above. The bombers were already bleeding. 2 had dropped from formation, trailing smoke. The gunners inside were down to their last belts of ammunition, and the nearest friendly aircraft was somewhere above a cloud deck that had swallowed the rest of the 354th Fighter Group whole. Howard was 30 years old, a former Navy aviator turned Army fighter pilot, with 6 confirmed kills from the Pacific already painted on his logbook. Yet he had flown these same escort missions dozens of times. He knew the math. He knew what 9 against 1 meant at 18,000 feet over Nazi Germany. He attacked anyway. To understand what James Howard did that afternoon, you have to understand what those bombers represented and what the winter of 1944 had already cost the 8th Air Force. The mission to Oschersleben was part of Operation Argument, the Allied effort to hammer the German aircraft industry into rubble before the planned invasion of France. Factories at Oschersleben and Halberstadt produced FW-190 airframes. Knock them out and the Luftwaffe would field fewer fighters against the beaches of Normandy. Simple logic, horrific execution. The 8th Air Force had been losing crews at a rate that made senior commanders lose sleep. Yet in one 3-day stretch the previous October, Black Week the airmen called it, the 8th had lost 148 bombers over Schweinfurt and Bremen. 60 men per aircraft. Do the multiplication. An entire generation of young Americans disappearing into German sky. The solution was long-range fighter escort. But no American fighter had the range to fly deep into Germany and back. The P-47 Thunderbolt, nearly 8 tons of radial engine muscle, ran dry before it reached the target. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning had the legs but lacked the performance at altitude to handle the Bf-109G in a turning fight. Then the P-51 Mustang arrived in theater, fitted with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and drop tanks that stretched its combat radius to Berlin and beyond. It changed everything. As Howard had transitioned to the Mustang in the fall of 1943 with the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, the first to fly the P-51B in combat over Europe. By January 1944, he had already established himself as a precise, calculating pilot. Not reckless, not a showman, but utterly relentless once the guns were armed. The 354th launched from Boxted, England, on the morning of January 11th with explicit orders. Stay with the bombers. Do not leave the formation for personal kills. The B-17s of the 1st Bombardment Division were the priority. Protect them. Howard understood the order. He intended to follow it. Then the clouds intervened. The overcast over Germany that day reached from 12,000 feet to nearly 22,000. Climbing to clear it, formations split. Escort elements lost their assigned groups in minutes. Radio discipline collapsed into a stream of position calls that meant nothing once visual contact was gone. Howard stayed with his assigned box of bombers as long as he could. By the time the formation reached the initial point and turned toward Oschersleben, he had lost his wingman. His flight had scattered into the gray. He pressed ahead alone, staying high and behind the bombers, scanning the sky the way every fighter pilot learned to scan, never fixing on one point, always moving, always looking for the thing that shouldn't be there. He saw it first as a glint, sunlight catching a canopy at 3 o'clock high, then a second, a third, 9 aircraft dropping out of the east in a loose gaggle, aimed directly at a group of B-17s that had already taken flak damage and were struggling to maintain formation. At their tail gunners were tracking but not firing. Ammunition conservation, a sign they were nearly out. Howard later described his decision as simple. They needed help, he told the debriefers that evening. There wasn't anyone else. He hit the lead element first, diving from above and behind, using the Mustang's superior speed in the dive to close the distance before the FW-190 pilot knew he was there. The first burst caught the German fighter in the wing root. It rolled inverted and fell away. 8 remaining. Howard pulled up hard, trading speed for altitude, forcing the nearest Bf-109 to overshoot. The German pilot corrected quickly. Howard was already turning inside him, cutting across the circle, firing a short burst. Hits on the engine cowling. Smoke. The 109 broke off. 7. Yet the next minutes are reconstructed from the gun camera film Howard brought back in the testimony of 23B, 17 crewmen who watched the fight from their windows with something between awe and disbelief. Staff Sergeant Roy Schaefer, tail gunner on a B-17 named Stinky, later told a Stars and Stripes reporter that watching Howard was like watching a man swatting flies with his bare hands. He meant it as the highest compliment he knew. Howard worked the formation the way a sheepdog works a flock. He was never in the same place twice. He'd attack from the left, force a break, swing to the right to cut off the next attacker, fire, climb, turn, fire again. His airspeed bled down in the hard turning fights to the edge of a stall. He didn't care. Stalling at 18,000 feet was recoverable. A FW-190 shooting, uninterrupted at a lame B-17, was not. By the 15th minute, 3 German aircraft had been damaged or destroyed, and the tight coordinated attack had fragmented. The Luftwaffe pilots were now flying defensively, uncertain where the lone Mustang would appear next. 1 against 9 had become, in the chaos and smoke of actual combat, something harder to quantify. Howard was inside their decision cycle. They couldn't coordinate. They couldn't commit. One of his cannons jammed. He kept fighting. A second cannon jammed. He kept fighting. By the time the bomber formation crossed back over the Dutch border heading west, Howard had 1 gun firing. He stayed with the bombers until the German fighters had disengaged entirely, then climbed to rejoin whatever remained of his group. The whole engagement had lasted 30 minutes, and the debrief at Boxted that evening was a careful, factual affair. Howard reported what he'd done without flourish. The intelligence officer looked up from his notes several times with an expression that suggested he wasn't sure which part to doubt first. The gun camera confirmed it. The B-17 crew statements confirmed it. The 354th's commanding officer, Colonel Kenneth Martin, submitted the paperwork for the Medal of Honor the same week. It was awarded in January 1944, an unusually rapid decision by the Army bureaucracy. The citation noted that Howard had single-handedly attacked what witnesses estimated at between 9 and 30 enemy aircraft. The actual count was never precisely established. Howard himself said 9 or 10. The bomber crews said more. The gun camera showed what it showed, and he became the only American aviator to receive the Medal of Honor in both the Pacific and European theaters of World War II. Howard flew until the end of the war. He added to his score, survived the flak, survived the missions over Berlin when the Luftwaffe threw everything it had at the escort formations. He retired from military service in 1965 as a brigadier general. He didn't talk much about January 11th, 1944. When asked, he repeated the same short version. They needed help. There wasn't anyone else. He died in 1995 at age 82. The mission to Oschersleben changed nothing about fighter escort doctrine and everything about how escort pilots understood their job. The standing order, stay with the formation, no freelancing, was already creating tension between pilots who wanted kills and commanders who wanted bombers to survive. Howard's engagement proved the orders were right, but for a reason no one had put into precise language. One fighter, used correctly, could be worth more than a full flight. Positioning mattered. Aggression at the right moment mattered. Protecting the asset mattered more than any personal score. The Pioneer Mustang Group used Howard's gun camera footage in training for the next 18 months. Other groups borrowed it. The lesson wasn't that one man could beat 9. The lesson was narrower and more permanent. If you stay with the bombers, you might save 20 men today, and those 20 men might come home. The airspace over Oschersleben is quiet now. Farmland and small roads, nothing to indicate what happened at 18,000 feet on a cold morning 80 years ago. The fortresses came home. Most of them. That was the point. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten stories from the edges of history. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these memories alive.